Morning. We respect your time, so we'll make every effort to get you out of here on time as well. But we're looking forward to an interesting conversation today on a topic near and dear to, I assume, all our hearts because you're here and haven't won the Powerball, right? No?
I won $8.
Tina Quigley gave me a little piece of trivia before this. It was 1.6 billion, right? And you know that's exactly the same number of orange cones we now have in the valley? Please tell me she's laughing right now. All right. I'm Bill Brown with Brookings Mountain West. Again, thanks for joining us. I want to thank our colleagues in putting this event together, our folks at RTC, including Tina. Angela is here somewhere, and is David Swallow as well. And I hope you saw out front our friends from Keolis are here with their information. Please talk to them as well. And while you're all distinguished, we have some people who are slightly more distinguished. I want to acknowledge just a few guests here today. That's right. A good host. You're all the same. Congressman Jim Bilbray is here right in front. Thank you. I saw Senator Mark Menendo earlier. He's here. Assemblyman Derek Armstrong is up the back there. And did I miss anybody? I know we'll have some people coming in. Oh, Deborah March is here from Henry. Excuse me. Thank you. And we'll catch up with any others that we should. I want to bring our colleague Tina Quigley up to say a few words.
Thank you. I just wanted to say thanks to the fact that you showed up today to spend some time means that you are very interested in learning more about this mode of transit and how it might apply here in Southern Nevada. There's a lot to learn about it. It's not just as simple as the concept of light rail. And I also appreciate you being here because it seems to be that this is the first time in Southern Nevada that we've gotten as far along in a conversation about light rail than we ever have before in the past. And we appear to be a community that seems to be interested really in learning more. And in learning more, we become that much better at when we do get the opportunity to move towards implementation. But one of the things that we learn every time we do talk to another metropolitan area that has had success in implementing a system is that you have to build community support for it. You have to get out there and educate the community as much as possible about what it is, how it works, and how it benefits the community. So everybody in here, I know, and I know that you all you'll be evangelizing. And as you learn, you will share it with the community. I guess that's the greatest benefit that we could have out of something like this. So I thank you for coming. Great. And thank you for that. Yeah, our elected official leaders who are in here too. You guys are awesome about evangelizing this and just getting the community interested and showing support about what it could mean. So I thank you. I've got my boss in here too. So.
Thank you. Thanks, Tina. So we're going to get right to it. We're going to go through a couple PowerPoint presentations for you. Just a word of advice. We have a website for the event, and we'll show that to you at the end of the morning. But the website's already up. It will have the PowerPoints you're about to see, hopefully before you get back to your office or home or wherever you're going, but in the immediate future. As will the videos of the event today, thanks to our colleagues here at Greenspun Hall. And we're very proud tenants of this building. Our offices are right up above us on the second floor, but it's terrific to have a resource like this to call on for an event like this. I want to just acknowledge our staff who've helped us with this event before and not at the end. You may have met our students, Ashley and out front, as well as yes. And our office manager, Chrissy Nanton, couldn't be here, even though she planned this whole event, because with her inimitable planning skills, she brought her daughter Olivia into the world on December 31st. So she was planning right up until the end. So, so I'm going to bring my colleague. I've never introduced you that I can think of. I'm going to bring Rob Lang up here. Rob has made a career out of studying cities, particularly southwestern Sunbelt cities. He's taught, written, researched, and you've probably heard him on more than one occasion on various issues. But We couldn't have a better speaker to walk us through what cities around the country have done, are doing, and will be doing, and then take a look at Las Vegas and offer some suggestions there. Rob?
Thanks, Bill. And the purpose of the first talk is to just describe what it is in a common language that we're looking to build within this valley, and to cover the entire spectrum of rail so that you understand what applications of rail we don't need, where we don't need to build, what types we don't need to build. Because when we have this discussion, immediately people think we're talking about the BART system or something like that, or they think commuter rail. And we have these discussions where, and these are thoughtful people often, that say, can we drag it all the way up to Moapa? If Moapa were Provo, yes. So, if they say, for example, how come Salt Lake City has, an extension of its system that goes to Ogden and Provo? Ogden and Provo have over 500 million people each. If you've got 500 million people, we'll extend to you. But the spatial reality of southern Nevada is that our urban form is a blob. It just fits in one discrete space. The good news for us is that we don't have to construct a layer above light rail. We don't have to go really to commuter rail. If we did, if we ever wanted to go to a place like Apex, say, which is going to probably develop a pretty good industrial base now, it looks like it's on track. We do have the option of using a borrow from the freight system, that they do in Southern California in Metrolink. We have options for doing commuter rail if it was absolutely necessary, but that is not the first priority. The first priority is the city-making structure of either light rail or streetcars. And I want to go through the country and talk about examples of all that, starting with the high-speed rail. We have one true high-speed rail line, and it barely goes high speed through the Northeast, and I think people have been on that. They're giggling. I've been on it, certainly. It takes much too long to get to New York City from Washington than it should in any other developed country in the world. You'd be whisked there, but maybe we jump all over that with the Hyperloop. We're talking long-haul inner metro, long-haul commuter, heavy rail systems, our light rail system, and I think we could use an overlay maybe of a streetcar system. And then there's also places with multiple systems. So what's the best choice for the valley? We're not talking about bringing rail service to the entire county. We're talking about a much tighter space that never really gets past the Beltway, that never gets past the sort of urban core of the region, that maybe ends up in North Las Vegas just past the downtown in a park and ride, or ends in downtown Henderson, let's say, as the furthest reaches of the system as it would go. So I want to go and spend a little time on this table to start, because this is the sort of master table that covers all of the cities I want to touch upon, the types of rail, and you can see there's a diversity of places that have rail from east to west. Certainly there's a lot built in the southwest and west recently, and you see, for example, the year service began on these. Most of these are fairly new. The oldest system is the Bay Area Rapid Transit, which was actually three trains were built at once. Metro in Washington, D.C., MARTA in Atlanta, and BART under the Great Society programs from Lyndon Johnson. And it was a fresh start at heavy rail in 3 regions that had no history of it. And it's the last sort of big lift we've done in this country. LA did it on its own. LA built heavy rail on its own. It wasn't part of this program, but this was heavily subsidized by the federal government, as a matter of fact. And so that's the oldest one we're looking at here. The newest is the streetcar, and yes, they have a streetcar in Tucson. Tucson has beaten us in light rail, actually. And usually, Tucson doesn't even have a beltway. So Tucson usually doesn't beat us in anything. So, that's interesting in itself. The other thing is,
Rob, real quick,
yeah.
Can you tell the difference between what streetcar is? Because a lot of times people think streetcar is a trolley or a...
It is a trolley.
Well,
I'll show you. We'll talk more about that. Yes, all this it's the weight of the train, the speed of the train, the distance between tracks, the segregation of the train from people. So a streetcar is the most intimate in that it doesn't have real stations. If you're in Portland, you notice that there is a system, MAX, that goes out to the airport, and it hauls when it's in the flats on the way out to Portland Airport. And then in the heart of the city, in the downtown and across Burnside and over the bridge in this little tiny loop is the cute little Portland streetcar. And its stations are a pole. You know, you just walk right up to it. So the first kinds of transportation we had when we switched from, horse-drawn omnibus to, a rail carried by pulled by a horse, and then switched to trolleys were, and I'll show you this, you'll see as we go through this presentation, something where you just interfaced with. Now, steam engines and things like that carried long-haul passengers already in the mid and late 19th century. There were traction systems like cable where you had a common steam source and you put a cable out and you gripped it and you pulled yourself around. San Francisco and Chicago actually had the biggest cable system. But in the modern sense, what it means is that in the late 19th century, early 20th century, one of the most ubiquitous forms of urban transit were these cute little streetcars all over the place. And now they're not single cars usually, they're two cars together. You could have 8 cars rather in the metro system in Washington, D.C. Hundreds of people are boarding that kind of system. And you have to go in an escalator, down a station, through a turnstile. It's a very formal engagement. So I want to cover all those kinds of variables, if you will. High-speed rail, look at the length of the track. Look at the Intermetro Surfliner from Santa Barbara down to San Diego, 350. The Virginia Rail Express, which brings commuters into Washington, D.C. from Fredericksburg, Virginia, from Manassas, Virginia, 90 miles. Bay Area Rapid Transit, 104 miles. Then you get 23 miles, and they're building out the edges as we speak right now, in the light rail system. And then look at this jump. 3.9 on our monorail, 3.9 on a streetcar, and the people mover in Detroit's only 2.9 miles. And oh, by the way, yeah, we have people movers as well, and I'll describe what those are. And this region has several people movers, as a matter of fact. The number of stations you see also varies. And you see as many as 45 stations in BART and 37 stations on the light rail. And you see less stations on our monorail. But the more important variable is the distance between stations. So if you're on high-speed rail, you want to move. You don't want to stop every quarter mile. You don't want to stop every quarter mile on metro that's going on trains that are going between metropolitan areas along the coast in Southern California. A little more stops in a place like Virginia Rail Express. You're going to stop at Alexandria downtown and all that sort of stuff. And then on Bay Area Rapid Transit, you start to get every couple of miles, and then boom, 0.6 miles, 0.5 miles. The smaller systems, 0.2 miles. You can practically walk between the stops. And because they don't have the function of carrying you long distance, they're intended for a limited space. Look at the number of passengers. Most of these systems do not carry that many passengers, but look at BART. BART, mass transit, rapid transit, heavy rail, is carrying the most passengers. The Washington Metro, the New York City subways, SEPTA, the Southeast Philadelphia Transit Authority in Philadelphia, T in Boston. Those are the heavy trains that are carrying heavy commuter passengers. And then there's these, again, commuter rail could be a proprietary system where you're taking this many drivers off the road in the Washington Metro and the Washington region, and they're happy for it. The interesting thing is, look at light rail. The numbers on light rail are impressive in Phoenix. We're talking about a lot of people that aren't entering that downtown in automobiles. We're talking about, if you look at our situation, a lot of people who wouldn't be entering our tourist corridor or the convention center in passenger cars, and eliminating that many cars would be fantastic. And then you see less and less, and people are already bickering about how many people are actually riding the Tucson streetcar, and we can discuss that later. But even the people mover in Detroit's got some riders on it. Oop, sorry me. This thing jumps around, by the way. This thing, if you get nauseous, let me know. We're testing this out. A couple of more variables here. Direct street access, meaning can you interface with this thing right at street level? No, 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 no. Yes on light rail, yes on streetcars, no on monorail, go up escalator, and no on people movers. You got to go up an escalator. And then where do these travel? Most of these are surface, some are above ground, and then transit systems are often above and below ground when they're in cities like San Francisco, Washington, New York. The light rail is ground level. The monorail is above ground, a streetcar is ground level, and the people mover is above ground. What Las Vegas needs are street interfacing, ground level light rail, and possibly a streetcar. If we built the streetcar, it would go down Maryland Parkway. And it would be a more limited system that would go through downtown, that would link the medical district. If we do light rail, that goes through the Strip, that goes up to North Las Vegas. There's a commuter possibility because you could build a park and ride just past the downtown and pick a lot of workers up on that system. You can do that in Henderson as well. So there's a difference and a reason to build each of these systems. And there's expectations about each of them, and there's benefits from each of them. What's nice about streetcars and light rail is that they're city-making technology. What you really get on that streetcar in Maryland Parkway is, if you look across the street from Greenspun Hall, there's parking lots. If you build something as fixed as a streetcar, as a trolley, you're going to see those parking lots fill with higher density, mixed use, multi-story structures, and the real estate value of that is one of the benefits we're looking at. Okay, let's visit the various systems, starting with high-speed rail. So again, this is 14 stops. It's just hauling along the Northeast, not nearly as fast as it should. That's the route map. And the big stations include places like Penn Station in New York, Union Station in Washington, D.C. And you can see, they try to show it looking like it's moving fast, but believe me. But somewhere in southern Connecticut, you can throw, a rock at it, and it's, it's too slow to even get hit by a rock, if you will. So, Intermetro, the sort of long-haul passenger rail, Pacific Surfliner is actually a very successful system. It is the equivalent of the Northeast Corridor. The most successful parts of the Amtrak system are the Northeast Corridor line, Washington, D.C. to Boston, and then, of course, Southern California. It makes sense. The two largest scaled urban complexes in the United States are the southern part of California from Santa Barbara to San Diego, which has 25 million, 26, depending on how you count the population of the Inland Empire, not 26, 28 million people. The Northeast has about 60 million people. These are the kinds of densities that in Europe or Asia, they build high capacity through too. It's not that the US lacks the densities to build, and LA is an extremely dense environment. Actually, New York, if you look at satellite imagery and you do the calculation of how many people live per net acre, and the satellites can give you these because they're looking at resources and whether or not we're using too much farmland, and they calculate out through an algorithm how much people are living in relatively high density. The densest region is New York, second is LA. Third is Las Vegas. And the reason is that we're hemmed in. Mountains, BLM, go ask the Bundys. They feel hemmed in. And we're desert, and you got to put water to everybody's house, and you have small lots. You might have single family homes. And the interesting thing is we just don't make a lot of use of that right now. What we have is the highest density without any of the accommodation of that in terms of pedestrian orientation, in terms of city making. So we have all of the sort of built form that would imply an easy and successful conversion into some form of rail transit. But it's just we haven't had the will so far to build it. And as Tina said earlier, I think she's right. I think we're as close as we've gotten, and I think we're gonna go to completion on this. So this thing runs along from San Luis Obispo, really north of Santa Barbara, to San Diego. It has this wonderful stretch, by San Onofre or Carlsbad, and those nice stations where you're riding along the beach. So if I had to pick one, I'd rather ride this train than the Northeast Corridor, which is barrels of toxic waste in New Jersey. Barrels and barrels of toxic waste. I could say that because I went to Rutgers University, and I had to take this train from New Brunswick to New York all the time. And the whole path was the history of the Industrial Revolution from the chemical perspective. And there it is on this nice little bluff. Don't rain too hard, El Nino. You'll wash that bluff away. That's the one thing is Southern California is fragile. All right, going back to the commuter line. So VRE is this system that's, people have jumped onto the freight line here and borrow the freight line so that, when people say, why are we running these trains? You're already doing freight. So it's about, and you already have metro stations like at Old Town Alexandria. So it's an easy thing to do. There's times where the thing has to go slower in the summer because the tracks heat up and everybody complains. But if you live in Central Virginia and you work in Washington, this is one of the best options you can take because this system is something that avoids almost all that traffic heading into Washington from the south, which is heavily laden. So it's popular that way. And here's just two looks at the track all the way past Manassas and down to Spotsylvania, past Fredericksburg down. You see the little, P, those are park and rides. It's intended for commuters. The primary person entering this is leaving the car somewhere else because, and people say this about, let's just say if we did high-speed rail to Los Angeles. People say this all the time. I don't want high-speed rail to Los Angeles because it only goes to Victorville. Well, here's a conversation I've never had in Washington. No one's ever said to me, I don't want to go from DC to Richmond because the thing stops at Spotsylvania. Here's why. They don't use it. People in Washington realize something. I don't ride VRE. It's for commuters. Here's the point to people who are bitching about Victorville. Hey, if you live in Las Vegas, stay off it. It isn't for you. It's a railhead in a place where people would use a park and ride. And they would come over Cajon Pass. Why can't we go over Cajon Pass? Why don't you ask Warren Buffett that? He owns it. Okay? It's for freight. And it's heavy freight because the port at LA is the busiest port in the country. And the Alameda Corridor spills out through Cajon Pass. And those freight trains are coming one after another. So Victorville is as close as you could get to the, you ready for this? 5+ million people living in the Inland Empire who would find it more convenient to go to that station, park their car, and not get stuck in traffic from St. Rose Parkway all the way down to the border in California on the way home. It's a park and ride system. So in the Northeast, when they have discussions about park and ride to Washington, in places like Central Virginia, in Maryland, no one has to go into the public realm and say, please don't write hateful comments in the newspapers. It's a park and ride, and they'd get it. So if you were selling this to Washington and you said, Washington is a major place for tourism, and Richmond ends up having 18 million people in it, and we'd like to have access to those people through an alternate means than them being frustrated on returning on a holiday weekend and swearing never to come to Las Vegas again because they're traumatized, because they need group therapy where they share stories and exchange about thinking of having, I was thinking of moving to Barstow. I was thinking of moving to Baker rather than actually coming home. You know, I turned around and started looking at real estate in Las Vegas, somebody told me once. So we don't have to have that conversation in Washington. You have to have it here. We have to educate people on that. All right. And finally, it's just to look at some of the stations like at Alexandria, and there's an extensive park and ride throughout the whole system. All right, BART. And a lot of people have ridden this, and this is, again, sort of classic heavy rail, lots of stations, lots of stops, but mostly it's not meant like the New York City subway system. It is a commuter line, by and large, because it goes out to these far-flung areas of the reaches of the Bay Area. You know, certainly now with Silicon Valley's emergence, this would have been developed in a manner different than it was in the 1960s. The problem with the MARTA system in Atlanta, the metro system in Washington, which is being expanded out to, it's at Tyson's Corner, which is a big office area, and so on, is that we were stuck with the spatial work or the geography, the physical form of metros in the 1960s. And so we had to do links to airports in these places. People weren't thinking of linking up airports. But both Oakland and San Francisco Airport are now linked completely. And just a look at, this is the station at the BART system at SFO. Phoenix Light Rail is worth focusing in on because this is probably going to be the closest approximation to a system we do. And again, it just links urban Phoenix. It doesn't go all the way up to, you know, it doesn't go way out to the West Valley. It increasingly goes to the East Valley, and they'd like to expand it. And it also is a system that is on both sides of it already expanding. So it went expansion 1 in Mesa. It's round 2 in Mesa is coming. The north side of the system, I'll show you in a second on the site map, going for that as well. And here, if you just drill down on this. So if you look at this part of it, 2016, this is the plans for 2032, but this is underway. One of these opens in March, I think. So you see there's a lot more of Phoenix left around it, but what's in it is the downtown, this key corridor through here, the airport, all of this. You know, maybe a separate loop that picks up more of Tempe, and this is just a rail line, map of the rail line. You see the cars each place, those are large park and ride stations. So what is being accommodated is a lot of people, and I'll discuss this more in detail when I do the next talk, is that a lot of the use of space in Phoenix now reflects a sort of concentration of assets like ballparks and airports and all that in a very discrete, relatively modest sized space that you can capture in 23 miles. And they've built a system through it. And this system's got a lot of riders, and it's exceeded most of its expectations. And this is the point. You wouldn't be building more of it if it didn't work. You know, people are like, I'm not really sure it works. Why are they expanding it? If something doesn't work, you don't add to it typically. And in this case, it's, in fact, all of our competitors, Salt Lake's added to it, Denver's added to it, Phoenix is added. We're not just behind. They're adding to theirs. We're not catching places that have built light rail and we haven't built light rail. They're not only building light rail, they're going to stages of the system that we might not see for a generation because they have planned ahead and they have made these kinds of investments. And that's the important point here. You can't start this too soon because every other major metro and our key competitor like Orlando can say things like this. Sure, our convention center is 17 miles away from the airport, and that seems inconvenient. And yeah, the one is just a few miles away in Las Vegas. But get this, we'll beat that. We'll beat you on a trip from their airport, which you could practically see their convention center. You could certainly see the Strip. We'll beat you in our 17 miles because we built a maglev train to whisk you there. Like your theme park ride starts at the airport now in that maglev train. And it's not a theme park ride in that it's not trivial. It's a convention killer for Las Vegas. It is going to be a determining variable in picking up conventions, and they're hungry for conventions in Orlando. They haven't been that successful at conventions. We do 5 million people plus. They do 1 million plus. They got all the same infrastructure, but they're not filling their hotels the way we are. And they're building the infrastructure to complete that competitive posture. So, Phoenix. And there's just some shots around the scenes. I'll do more of that when I do the talk. So we're at a crossroads. We have a monorail, 3.9 miles. It connects several of the large casinos. It never really enters the city. It doesn't really go through the urban spaces. And here's just a system map. We have one system on the east side that is a monorail. These are people movers, which I'll describe in a second. And they are just for the hotels. They're free. And one thing that's true of the whole system, I think you can see from this map alone, is nothing connects to anything. I mean, the hotels connect to the convention center. And we could complete this system and get the Mandalay Bay Convention Center and make it a convention center proprietary system, a hotel convention center complex. And that wouldn't be bad if we build the rest of the rail around it. It actually fortifies it if we do that. It takes the monorail, which was privately invested in. So when people say, I don't want to waste the money again on a streetcar or a light rail, well, we built the monorail. Was it your money? No. It was somebody else's money. It was bondholders' money. So the bondholders, you should check in with them. If they're unsatisfied, perhaps they can weigh in. But for the meantime, you haven't spent a nickel on this thing. And if you don't ride it, you certainly don't spend a nickel on it. And it's working. And it's got more riders than people think. And it can function still if it's part of something integrated and comprehensive. You have to capture the monorail space around it and integrate it so that you feed people into the system, and then it will be better. And then these trains on the west side are just convenience for people between hotels. They want to keep you in the space that MGM is dominating and keep you playing and keep you shopping and so on and keep you in their restaurants. So it's not a true city rail the way others have developed. Tucson streetcar, again, this is single line, began service just a couple of years ago, a year and a half ago really, 3.9 miles. What it gets though is it's the University of Arizona's connection to the downtown. And it runs through the University of Arizona campus right down the middle of it. And it connects to the downtown and to a medical district. There's a big, unlike the UNLV, they got to get a big hospital in the 1960s and medical complex and so on. And we're gonna get ours, and ours is gonna get rail. But they got theirs and they got rail to it. And they're building that asset out. So this is just a quick look at the system map. Again, the whole University of Arizona campus is covered. You see the downtown, and this 4th Street corridor is a fun, student-led services corridor. It would be good if we had something like this, or Mill Ave. Maryland Parkway could be that. So here's what's going on. Mill Ave in Phoenix now is not just a downtown in Tempe at ASU. It's also fortified by light rail access. And I'll show more of that in the second talk. The other one here is Tucson and University of Arizona. It's got rail to it. There's rail to the University of Utah. Here's what you can do. Why do I mention that? When I went to Rutgers University, I went with no car because it was a walkable city. And if I wanted to go to New York or Philadelphia, there was a train. If you go to ASU, you don't need a car. If you go to University of Arizona, you don't need a car. We're now competing with schools for millennials who have a preference for this mode of transportation in the first place, and we're not offering it. We are missing students, and we're having students not apply with strong resumes because we don't have this capacity. Maryland Parkway would be a lift if it were changed, not just for the real estate investors along it, but for the university and what the university could offer the city, because this university in this city is doing $700 million a year in sponsored research. They're doing $500 million a year in sponsored research at ASU. Our entire state does $125 million. To put that in perspective, so does Fargo, North Dakota. So does Fairbanks, Alaska. So does Las Cruces, New Mexico. Not Albuquerque, which does hundreds of millions. So we really don't have this capacity. We really don't have this kind of facility. And rail is part of the game plan for getting it. And there's just some shots around. This is 4th, coming around the bend, back towards the school. And then finally, there is the people mover. And you need to cover this because people movers are actually ubiquitous in that most airport links to terminals from gates are actually people movers. They're not monorails because they got more than one rail. So you've been on this. Everyone here has been on it. If you haven't been on it in the hotels, if you go to McCarran and you have to go to the D gates and you go out on that stop to stop, that's actually a people mover. Now, they work wonderful in airports. I would recommend people movers for all airports. They don't work as well in cities because they don't have the quality of the street interface. They're also, seen as sort of limited spaces, and if you got a dying district like downtown Detroit, although there's some, only the buildings that exist are shown here. I like to joke, everything else is a vacant lot. That's not true. These are the, anyone from Detroit, I'm sorry about that. Didn't mean to take a shot at Detroit. Couldn't help it. It's morning, I'm trying to stay awake. Detroit came up. I had to take the shot, sorry. So the Renaissance Center, and there are big convention centers there. They just did an auto show in this big convention center, for example. And here's just a look at the loop. It is a closed little loop. I've been to Greektown. There's 2 or 3 stops worth making, and the rest is a sort of failed amusement park ride. Or it's missing an airport, if you will. So Detroit people mover, just a couple of shots of it. You see it's elevated again. And you could see this. So if you go in city center, that's a people mover. Because it's not a monorail, it has more than one rail. And it's proprietary, and it's through a space like that. So we're at a crossroads. Let's talk, and I want to finish this talk by covering just, what do we mean by some of these rail systems, and do we go above ground, do we go below ground, and all that jazz. So this is the Las Vegas Valley. And we took a satellite image at night because you could see it's bounded, which means, as I said earlier, that this urban core right here, which is one of the most visible things from space because it represents intensity of use, urban intensity, is really the kind of most of what we're talking about using the light rail to link up. And just to let you know where we are, in 2011, this is what was under construction around the country. So if you look at Portland, as I mentioned it earlier, Portland has a streetcar, that's the little blue box, and it has the little circle representing light rail. So what they do is they do multiple systems here, opening, construction started, construction's continuing, and you see it around the country. They left a couple of places off. I don't know why they thought, I guess at this point in 2008, Phoenix was done. So it had been completed. But you see how busy this is around the country, and what Washington has is a metro rail, which is really the transit systems like the Bay Area I was talking about. So what's really changed in the last few years, and starting in the middle of last decade, is how many systems have taken this on. You see Texas cities that had no experience with it. Orlando has commuter rail and now has a maglev. Miami has trains, for example, Norfolk. And this is just 2016, so this is an update. We're here now because this one includes bus rapid transit, and we are doing BRT, and we have BRT. BRT is nice, especially it clears the path for where you could eventually put rail in as well. It's a nice starter system, and we should keep some BRT anyway. BRT is an alternative and less expensive to light rail. It's not a city-making technology because people don't see it as a long-term investment. So they don't build multifamily housing around it, and they don't build up the sort of urban space around it. And just an illustration quickly, this is the difference between these. So these are people. I don't know if the lights are too bright on this thing. Maybe we can turn the lights down so we can see. We got to see the videos better too later on. This is a common comparator where you see the difference between, this is how many cars equals this many people. And this is if they were in transit. So if you think about the space that we have in our city and the space we have at the Consumer Electronics Show around the convention center, and think about how precious that space is as far as access. every single passenger in a vehicle like that is basically taking up a lot more space than would be people packed in a train or in a bus or any other form of transit, or biking, and they're biking right here. So a big question, elevated, street level. My sense is that most of the system here would be street level. We may need to drop down because we have already such urban intensity on the Strip, and it may prove so disruptive that we might have to switch modes and leave ground level. But the essence of a light rail, the heart of it, is that it's convenient for street access. So when I was recently, in December 30th, you'll see we have video from when I was recently in Phoenix, I was in such a system where you feel the intimacy of just walking right up to it. And if you've already got your passage for the day and the train's coming, you just hop right on, you can bike right on, you roll it, it's at grade even. And that's different when you look at what we have around here. So this is just a shot of city center. Perfectly fine going hotel to hotel. This is Las Vegas, New Mexico, by the way, which had a streetcar at one point. So I'll leave it. I don't want to get way into the controversy. But if you're doing light rail, most of it's going to be grade. Most of it's going to be street grade. If you're doing a streetcar, it's certainly all street grade. It's a streetcar. That gives it away right there. It isn't a people mover. That's from the 60s. It's not, in the future, we'll all be on, people movers and all that sort of stuff from when I was a kid. And we've had, challenges going below ground in Las Vegas, just as an editorial note on that. As you see, we've had not a lot of success. All right, I'm going to go on to the second talk now and just stay put, and I'll do Q&A at the end of it all. And because I'm trying to speed through this, you all have busy lives and a busy day ahead of you, I'm sure, although it's the start of a 3-day weekend. But if you could, Jennifer, load up the next talk. So what I'm doing next is I took I decided to do the second talk. So in your literature, it says we're going to now talk. The first part was, what are these things? So we have a common language. The second part of the talk is, why do it? And I decided the best way to describe why doing it, instead of doing it abstractly, is to drop down in our neighboring city in the system that has the greatest relevance to us and look at how things are getting done there. And I did this as recently as on December 30th, 2015, the second to last day of last year. I spent a whole day and rode this system end to end, and I had a new iPhone, and I shot video and footage all through the system to show this sort of interface with the city, to show its use, who's on the train, how it's stopping, how fast it's going, and all that. So, oh, by the way, this was what we were planning in the 70s. You see the dunes over there. See, we were looking people movers at that point. We were ahead of the curve at this stage of the game. And then this is from a 7 magazine where they showed there's UNLV and there's a train coming right by. That would be a nice image. And then there's the Valley Metro symbol. Just a couple of seconds on my background, which I skipped on the first one, I didn't bother doing, is that I am an urban planner. I was an urban planning professor in Virginia Tech in Alexandria. And the neat thing about being an urban planning professor is you get to go drop in on cities and spend a day there and take your iPhone out and enjoy, looking at the people watching and the sort of, the infrastructure investment. I'm now at the Greenspun College, and I think within time I'm here, we'll have urban planning in the school, but I'm in public administration. So I say urban and public affairs. And I'm also at the Brookings Institution in Washington as a senior fellow, and I'm directing this institute. And what's in this talk is a case study from the Phoenix Metro. A windshield survey. Now, a windshield survey means what it says it does. You literally go around and take things through a windshield. Now, why do you do that in planning? One of the interesting things about planning is you need to have some sense about how something's being used. You cannot just look at it abstractly as data, as statistics, remotely, because there's the theory of doing light rail, and then there's the practice of doing light rail. Here's the really good news for Las Vegas. We don't have to have any theories of light rail. It's practically everywhere but here. So the bad news is we're last. The good news is we're last. Because we don't have to make any mistakes whatsoever in the execution of the system. Because there's nothing, and so people even say, how do you know this works? And my first question to them is, have you ever been anywhere but Las Vegas? Because if you have, you surely run into this. And if it doesn't work, why are they building it? Oh, they're building it because it's public money. Believe me, even if it's public money, you have a lot of pressure to do other forms of infrastructure investment if it wasn't practical. So the case for it is pretty manifest. I mean, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, early, Portland's and places like that, you had to make the case for it. If you were talking about this and it was 1995 in Las Vegas, or 2005 in Las Vegas even, you'd still be burdened with a kind of, we need to make a case for this. What about this? What about that? How about crime? Somebody's going to get on one of these systems, steal a television set with wires hanging off, enter it, sit down in a security camera, and steal from your house. I'm going to suggest that's not a common thing. Because if you want to steal from somebody's house, do yourself a favor, get a car. That's why we should ban all roads. Most thieves use cars, so we need to ban all. They had these ridiculous discussions. In the last decade, and I won't mention any names, but this was under discussion in this valley. And this valley chose not to do it. And in that discussion, people said, I don't want it, because it'll bring crime. It's going to bring crime. And they said that in Scottsdale. They said that in Georgetown, in Washington. You go back to Scottsdale. You go back to Georgetown. You ask them, good call? No. What they say in Georgetown is, did you realize that the rent per square foot in the dorky parts of Arlington vastly exceeds ours? The commercial space is booming. Scottsdale, beautiful downtown. Tailor-made for light rail, walkable. But again, this ethos of, oh no, other people use that. Other people. Yeah, other people, your customers, use that. And so this stigma, even in these recent cases, has pushed the rail to places where people said, well, that's the urban part of town. I don't want it coming out here. But I don't, and I remember Scottsdale had little hitching posts till recently, even. Do you remember being in downtown Scottsdale? You had Frank Lloyd Wright, you're selling hitching posts? You had the greatest American architect built in your city. I would make everything Frank Lloyd Wright-esque and be aggressively modern, and they have. And at one point in 06, when I was at ASU, I was a consultant and I was saying just that. But I was the 50th consultant to tell them that. But they did not take the rail. And they were proud. In 06, they told me, yeah, we did that because, crime. Crime. Yeah, no, crime. Crime. Crime comes with rail. Crime, I said, yeah, what's your empirical evidence of that? They were like, I don't need any. I've seen the dirty cities where they have rail. And they look scary and funky people are on, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. So I also talk about traffic congestion, the link to economic development, and I think a version of the Phoenix system would work in Las Vegas. And this video and the filming was from that date I've just mentioned, the end of December, to show that streetscape, to show the urban land uses, also the flow of something like this. People want to know, how fast is it? When I was writing a book called Boom Burbs, there was a mayor of Gilbert, Arizona, in the middle of the last decade, last name Berman. And he said to me, you ever seen these light rail things? I said, sure, they're all over the country. They're antique. They don't go very fast. No one wants to ride them because they're not quick enough. They don't move fast enough. They break down a lot, he told me too. I'm like, really? Because he's been on Metro in other cities and they have service problems and outages. But those are old, if you're in Philadelphia or Chicago, these systems have, bolts in them that were laid down by great-great-grandparents in some cases. So yeah, they're gonna be a little cranky, but when you build these systems new, they work as smooth as can be. And just report out what you see. And urban planners are used to this method. So when I say this now and I show, look, there's this fancy way of doing it, because people think, what kind of field is this that you drive around and look at stuff? That's why I went in it. I'm that kind of guy. To me, I could do physics, but that's hard. Find me a field where you can just drive around and look out the window. So I'm ready for that. I'm okay with that. Also, the system is the most relevant to Las Vegas, and Phoenix is Las Vegas-like. We're a little denser than it. We actually have more opportunity to do it than they do. They have a little bit more of a challenge to do it than we do. If anything, our form, our space, our density, our intensity of land use, having an airport that has the second number of passengers leaving it. So Atlanta's a busier airport, but everybody's going somewhere else. If you're going to hell, you're going through Atlanta. You know that. Just heads up, if you're dying, you're planning on dying today, you'll make a stop there. But you're not getting out of Atlanta. You get out at LAX, number one, you get out at our airport, number two, you get out at Orlando, number three. So, you know, we have an airport that is unloading millions of people. And most of them, in the case of Phoenix, you're going all over. I'm going to Scottsdale at a resort, and they didn't build light rail there. I'm going, you know, here, the vast share are going to a very small space. It's linear, several miles long, but it's narrow, and it's discrete. It's tailor-made for a linear system. So we actually have the most inexplicable, and people come and visit our city all the time. You know, we had the Secretary of Transportation most recently, the Mayor of Mesa. Everybody's always said, I had to wait for an hour at your taxi stand. I'm looking at the hotel. Why are you doing this? So we do have that opportunity. And you see this system under construction. I did a sabbatical semester in the spring of 2006, 10 years ago, when they were building this system. And they were jackhammering outside the apartment I had at the Trillium at Rio Salado, just north of the town lake in Tempe. And now that whole system is complete through there, and they have offices, and First Solar's headquarters are there, and all that. But I want you to note, it is disruptive when you build it. Look at this. So it's not an unfair concern. So if the strip says, how messy is it when you're building it? Messy. How disruptive is it? Be honest, it is. There's ways to mitigate it, but the truth is, you tear the whole street apart, and you have to bring in all this heavy equipment, and you have to put steel down. And even though once it's done, it looks like hardly any change has been made, the undergirding, the amount of concrete poured to hold the train weight and all that is part of the infrastructure cost. So it's not, and I can tell you from somebody who lived literally while they were building this system right next to it, from my personal experience. I got lucky. I lived on the side of the complex away from it. There were people who lived right next to it. They told me they couldn't sleep. They were getting up at 6 in the morning, but now that it's complete, it works a lot better. So I shot some video, and I shot it along the Phoenix Innovation Corridor. And Phoenix finds that a lot of the firms that are tech firms want this space along Central Ave, north of the downtown. And there's some of this east of the downtown is kind of a biotech district east of the medical school in downtown Phoenix, this direction. But right through here, so you see the red arrows. This is where I start, Portland Street. This is where I end at Thomas Road. So 3 videos moving north, and I shoot these over the shoulder of the driver in real time at the front of the train. So you don't see the sideways view, you see the whole streetscape. All right. But first, I want to show you old school. This is, by the way, what it's going to look like when we're done with building it. Just like this. I want you to notice something here. People are risk takers in the early 20th century. They are, and they're being sold extra software as they do it. Look at the interface right here. Look out! Whoa! Look, whoa, no, yes, yeah, I'll do it. There is no concept of a crosswalk. There is, and look at how common the trains are. They're coming one after another, single car. So from this video, look out, you see the intimacy of a streetcar. People grab this thing on the street, call it, let it go. There was more minutes on that, but it's more of the same thing. I wanted you to see that because I want you to understand what an important contrast this is. In the early part of the 20th century, when these were developed, you didn't really have risk for fast-moving vehicles prior to the early 20th century. Nothing went very fast. Steam engines went fast, but they were completely segregated from you. In fact, they were banned from most cores of most cities. They were banned, lower Manhattan banned steam engines, because if you started and stopped them often, they blew up. So they could not be used for every half-mile transit. So what you had is horse-drawn omnibus. Then you put that on rail and you had horse-drawn streetcar. Then you had cable systems where you had one common wheelhouse and a cable went under the track, and what it does is it just grips it to move, and you let go when you want to stop. Grip and let go. And it's still, rarely found. San Francisco had it. People think that cable was there because they had hills. The biggest cable system was in Chicago, and it's flat. Then somebody invented the light bulb. And the reason I say that is that was the killer category for electric generation. You couldn't have electrified streetcar until you had light bulbs, because light bulbs became common and they were in every house, and they paid for the construction of large generating stations. And then large generating stations had a complementary value in pushing streetcars. And who built the engines? Westinghouse. There is a streetcar museum depot in Paris, California. Not Paris, Paris. You'll always have Paris. I'll always have Paris, because Paris is the museum of every dead streetcar technology from Southern California. And they've let me walk through these dead streetcars. And the technology at the time is impressive. The control systems, and it's all General Electric, Westinghouse. It's all the same people that brought you electricity, brought you electric streetcars. But until you had that scale, you couldn't get it. And that's the first time people started to say, well, then how do we use these? Right away, this is what happened. Did you see that street scene? New York City said, we have to build this underground. That's why the subway came about. Because you were stuck in traffic. There's intersections, there's Chicago footage like this, where you're in the loop, you're dead stopped. So you had no priority. You had no stations. There was no sense of a station. It was a streetcar. It literally moved down the street and you grabbed it. Now I want to show you going from downtown, starting at Portland Street, to Midtown. And this is over the bridge that's over that park. Interstate 10 goes underneath. And you see a little Frank Lloyd Wright-esque Taliesin-like feature over there, because Phoenix gets it. Notice the speeds of the cars, but they get stuck at lights. You stop at a station, but you get priority on cross streets. You never get stuck for a light. Notice that nobody's jumping out in front of the train. Yeah. Notice it's electrified up here. This is their arts district now. And it's actually successful. I spent a little while on the arts district, going in the other direction. And you see the stations are pretty minimalist. It's not, the building of each one of our stations for the monorail is an ordeal. These stations are pretty cheap to build. Second video, I do 3 of these. So continuing along the same path, McDowell, you're leaving the arts district, you're going to come upon the Heard Museum. Note this is run through a corridor of mixed use commercial. It's mostly not housing. There is some housing. In fact, there's some early housing that predated this that pops up on the left along Thomas and along, Portland Street had some housing. This is some housing right over here, for example. But it's a lot of office, commercial, and institutional use like Heard. So you see, you're keeping pace. A car's going faster, but they might wait a minute at a light, too. And you might pick up passengers, but you're not going to wait at a light. The driver was a good guy. He didn't care I did this. By the way, thank you, Phoenix Metro.
Approaching station in Canton Central Avenue. Heard Museum. Exit to left.
So this isn't the busiest day. It's the day before New Year's. But there was still a lot of traffic in parts of the system. And then the last video I want to show you, just getting to Midtown. So you see the kind of urban space they're building through. It's not as intensely developed as the Strip, but it's not, suburban either. Although it ends of the system it is, and I'll show you some photos of that. And you see a lot of signage along the way of what's coming. See this? That's coming. Big buildings are coming. And big buildings are being built. And I'll show you other parts of the system where that's true. So you end up, and I stayed at that Hilton Suites that's over here. Parked my car in Phoenix and was there for a whole day and never moved my car. Because you can do that in Phoenix.
Approaching station. Thomas and Central Avenue. Midtown. Exit to left.
And I looked at the vacancies along here. These buildings were built in the late 80s and fell into the savings and loan crisis. And they were excessive space for the Phoenix metropolitan market. And even after that, they weren't the sexiest office buildings. Now what I find is that they are packed because they have access to this system. So not only does it build new real estate, it captures and fortifies the investment in older structures. It increases rents, it increases occupancy. And I know that development well because I've been in Phoenix over many, many years. And I've stayed in that hotel, I think the first time in the late 1980s. And I remember at one point in the early 90s, they were giving that hotel away for $29 a night and a free breakfast, because it didn't cost anybody anything, because all the investors didn't put money into it, didn't owe the S&Ls anything, because the S&Ls needed to be bailed out. So before the financial crisis of '08, the biggest dip in real estate was that. And Phoenix had a lot of real estate built along that corridor and in other parts of town that reflected that boom in the 80s and then got caught. And the good news for them is a lot of that's now secure because it's in this system. It's with rail. So what you see on the track is housing everywhere. And I caught a few glimpses out windows like that. The amount of vacant space along the system is evaporating. The land costs and bid rents along that reflect the fact that it's going for higher and better use. And not mostly high rises, mostly multifamily, lower slung structures like this. Some high rises. You see, I got even a little bit of, clean those windows, Phoenix. We're going to do a cleaner system. We're going to make sure we squeegee all the windows. But everywhere. And almost all of it, by the way, notice, is desert modern. There's no, sort of mission restored sort of space on these. It's all the next Phoenix. You also see the offices like Thomas Road, and there's the train coming in. You see dorms and hotels. This is a big Ramada Inn, or a Residence Inn. This is the headquarters for First Solar, and it was going to be 2016, so they changed all their louvers over to that. This is downtown Tempe coming into the station, and that's an ASU dorm. And what you see is the interface with other connection points. So this is the magic staircase to the SkyTrain at 44th Street. So Phoenix has rail linked. So if you fly into Sky Harbor and you don't want to take a taxi, there's a free train, it's paid for by landing fees at the airport, to the Metro at 44th, that you can get on it and you could stay in the hotel. If I flew to Phoenix, I didn't need a car either for where I stayed. So all of Tempe, you don't need a car, downtown Tempe, all of that. The whole corridor, the downtown, heading north, you don't need a car. And if you do need a car, you park and ride. And this is the one at the Mesa station, and this is the one north and west in central Phoenix. And you can see you're in a kind of lower density environment at the ends than you are at the core of the system. So who did I meet on the train? A lot of millennials were on the train. And a lot of them had bikes, and a lot of them were listening to music and not talking to anybody. So it was hard to get them chatty. So when you do a windshield survey and you're on public transit, one of the things you do is you just, you chat people up. And the millennials are not chatty. But they are not. They're in a world of their own. They're like, I didn't even want to break in because they were grooving to something. And they probably don't use that language either, but they were, and they had a bike, and they had all this sort of, accoutrement of young adulthood, of which I barely grasp at this stage. But I'm getting closer to these guys, so this was easier. What was fun is there were a lot of bowl games that week in Phoenix. And people were visiting friends who had permanent houses in places like East Mesa, coming from the Midwest, complaining it wasn't as warm as they hoped it would be, because it was a kind of a chilly week that week. And talking about how much better it is to jump on this thing than go into the scariness of downtown Phoenix. When you start to lose skills at driving, the first cities you give up are like New York and San Francisco. You may have never gotten to New York and San Francisco in driving skills to begin with, but let's say you had driving skills. Then you start to feel comfortable more and more in an Anthem, but don't want to go to the Strip. And you feel comfortable in those master plan communities that are senior housing, that are age-restricted housing around Phoenix. But you don't want to go to the Strip. One of the advantages is you could just park at a parking ride, go in, and they were going to ball games. And one of them was at Chase Field. And it wasn't even the day they were going, they were just testing to see how long it would take. They were going to eat lunch down there, they were going to do some shopping, and they were saying, where are you from? And I said, Las Vegas. They said, you should build one of these there. Because if you did, I'd love to get on it. I'd love to go down the Strip. I'd like to not need a cab. I'd never drive. It's crazy there. People will run you off the road, they said. It's even worse than Phoenix. Apparently we have an unsavory reputation in that regard. I don't believe that's true. I've been in Washington. I know what it's like when the diplomatic corps is given licenses within the United States, but no accountability because they could be whisked off to some other country, and they have dominion over themselves as they drive around streets and crash into your vehicle. But they are convinced that Phoenix is scary. And then a lot of park and ride commuters. And even on that day before New Year's, There is a large hospital downtown. There were nurses in uniform, and I talked to one of them. They hate parking there. It's expensive. They gave them passes so that they had subsidy, and they park and ride up top, and they just jump in their cars, and the thing comes so frequently. They said, what a convenience this is. I don't know any of us that are driving down there anymore. What's good is when your workforce, when your tourists, when your students are not using the system, or not using cars rather, and are using the system, you've got the workings of a successful system that's doing multimodal choice. In other words, people who want to use it, use it. The people who are on the road have less cars to contend with. There's less congestion as a consequence of it. It's a win-win because, you know, there are always people in Washington that even say when they built the train all the way out to Dulles Airport, which they're under construction to Reston now, and they're through Tyson's, they say to me, I'm never going to use it, but I hope somebody else does. And that means there's less people in front of me. And there's that kind of ethos with a lot of these people who aren't, the people of commuters not jumping onto the thing are somewhere happier in a car as a consequence. Now let's look at congestion here. Let's turn to Las Vegas again. What are the forces limiting us? Well, you can see. If this was a train, this would be a much clearer corridor, obviously. And I don't think that our airport's constraining us, our number of rooms, the convention space. I think that actually the greatest single vulnerability to our success as a tourist economy, and it's just as a successful, functioning, efficient metropolitan area, is that we don't have any alternative to cars. And most of the cars are occupied by single drivers. And they take up this kind of space all around the city. And you know, this is just a work-a-day, you know, coming off Trop here, but we didn't have a stadium here yet. And we're going to build more such things. Now, this is just street forms around the world. You see that there's different bones of cities. This is Midtown Manhattan, for example. And what you have in Midtown is a great grid. You have a sort of modified grid in San Francisco to reflect some of the urban form, and you have these older cities that are difficult to navigate. But a lot of the US and a lot of even sort of Canada built these sort of rational streetscapes. So, you know, there's old parts of Boston that reflect the kind of colonial planning style. But by the early 19th century, the US switched to the New York style efficiency. Philadelphia has this model and so on. The reason I raise this is that we are partly in that system. Oh, this is just another one of those shots with people in cars versus transit. We are partly under that system here, but we also have what are called super blocks. So we have blocks, and this is just a, you know, if you do everything in a cul-de-sac versus a grid structure. We have blocks by the convention center that have no grid structure left in them. So one of our problems isn't just that we have a lack of transit option. The other problem is that we built really big resorts, and each of them is an island that has to be driven around. Now the good news is we built big resorts. The good news for conventions is that we have 9 million square feet of convention space, and most of it is in the basements of hotels whose gaming floors were so big that any one of those basements is bigger than Pittsburgh's convention center. So Caesar's Palace is bigger than Pittsburgh's convention center. You know, the Mirage is bigger than Pittsburgh's convention center, and so on. So decent-sized cities like a Pittsburgh or a Cleveland have convention space, even though they have 2 million people and we have 2 million people. They have more than us. They have over 2 million. You know, 2+ million in St. Louis. They have, but they don't have anything we have because each hotel is itself a standalone mini city. Now that's great because if you're seeking a resort experience and you want the totality of a resort, and you want the pools integrated, and you want gaming and entertainment and food integrated, and you want to do a conference there, all this works. Where doesn't it work? It doesn't work when you're trying to build streets through it. And we have a challenge in that there's even remaining things like, oh, I don't know, a giant golf course. All of this was fine in the strip of the 1960s, 70s, 80s. But by the late 80s, in the new era, starting with the Mirage, when we built these super resorts, we are doing ourselves a sort of challenge, if you will. We're doing ourselves a disservice in that we haven't ever made the shift to say, okay, what is the street form that needs to support a large hotel? Because I wouldn't say, hey, let's not build large hotels, because the whole economy is large hotels. And large hotels have a physical reality of taking up an enormous urban footprint that has to be navigated around. There's just a simple reality of that structure. But what we haven't done, and what we can still do because we can retrofit it, is we could say, what are the street structure requirements and grid-like interchange that allow you to work backwards around that. And I'll tell you why. Because if you go back to the slide on New York City right here, and you look at this, Midtown Manhattan is a mess. But what you have is options. If you don't like the way streets are flowing, make a right. If you don't like that street, make a left. And enough people do that and make independent decisions so that there is a diffusion of traffic across a vast space. So Manhattan couldn't work as Las Vegas. Las Vegas can't work as Las Vegas, so Manhattan certainly couldn't work as Las Vegas. So that's the problem. Plus, they've got trains running all under this. So Midtown has trains and it has a grid, and we don't have either one of those things. We've got this, we don't have this. We don't have people, we've got cars. This is just 60 cars versus 60 people. And this is one little lonely bus against that. So we have mega blocks. We have malls and we have large hotels rather. In the rest of the world, a mall takes up a super block. Our whole city is a series of super blocks. And you see the super blocks right here. And the worst thing is, this is our convention center, and the whole east side of the Strip is a series of super blocks. So not only do you have no alternate for transit, not only do you have heavy demand because we have the largest conventions, and when we go to peak conventions like consumer electronics, you're on a street that was intended for much lower load of traffic and doesn't have any alternatives. It's got the monorail, and thank God, because it would be worse without it. The monorail is actually taking some relief off this, but we need more than that, and we need surface transportation to reflect that. So here's the problem. If a street system is not designed to carry high load, and it doesn't have multiple diffusion points, if you add density, you have a greater increment of traffic congestion for the density. It's not normal. It's every time you go with greater density, and density represents hotels that have 4,000 rooms, 3,000 rooms, 2,500 rooms, and so on. If a street system in an urbanizing space is not supported by rail transit, every increment of new density will add a greater increment of traffic congestion. Midtown Manhattan versus the Las Vegas Strip, New York can handle it. So people say to me, the most people I've ever seen as pedestrians are 42nd Street and Trop and Las Vegas Boulevard, or Flamingo and Las Vegas Boulevard. Those are the two greatest concentrations of pedestrians I have ever seen in my life in the United States. In fact, people are surprised the extent to which there is a pedestrian orientation on the Strip. It's one of the shocks. If you've never been to the Strip, you imagine that it's a much lower density, much more sprawling affair than it's been built into, which is a much higher density, much more intensely urban affair. And you're shocked that you're standing, shoulder to shoulder like you would be in Midtown Manhattan. But there is a critical difference. Midtown Manhattan does that more efficiently because it has both a street structure and a transit overlay, in the case underlay, because it's mostly subway, that allows it to get away with those densities. So when you look at Midtown Manhattan and you look at 42nd Street, how many people were delivered there by car is very different than the Strip. What we have is parking decks bigger than buildings in some other cities. And the entire back part of both sides of the Strip, Koval or Dean Martin or Frank Sinatra, all these sort of, if you're named for a star, you're not the sexiest street in Las Vegas. You're a workaday, you're a worker street, in Las Vegas. Those streets, those decks are deflecting an enormous amount of pressure, but they're also a contortion because what they're doing then is if you have to get mobility outside that corridor, get to the convention center, good luck to you. So what could we do in the Consumer Electronics Show? We could do 200,000, 250,000. They'd all be paying customers. They'd all be spending money. Why can't we go to those numbers? Some of it's some of the other mechanics of space, but mostly it's you wouldn't be able to move. And so if we don't clean this up, Orlando's saying, we're going to make you move. We're going to go at Las Vegas's business model that way. So what can you do? You can reprogram the traffic lights and get a little, and that doesn't cost much. You can widen intersections, get more turn lane capacity. You see that all around. That does reduce some congestion. Breaking up the super blocks is expensive, but cutting relief streets out of the east side of the Strip. So if Wynn wants to do something big, urban, wants to take the golf course and put in more convention space and do mixed use and do multi-purpose. That is an opportunity for the city, for the county to come in and do a kind of street system plan in cooperation with the hotels, because it's private space, that takes relief off some of this. And it's to the tune of $100 million or more. But the most important thing you could do is construct an integrated rail system that links key assets, because that's the only way to expand capacity. So most cities, when they do rail, the benefits for the rail are bigger for real estate investment and attracting millennials. Here's what's different in Las Vegas. We actually benefit from congestion straight up. That's the difference. So, because the manifest purpose, the stated purpose of transit typically to the engineers is, you need to do it because too many people are in cars. And then people come along and say, you know, we've looked at cities like a Phoenix. Not a lot of people have left their cars. And then you turn to, well, you know what it did though? Central Ave used to be a boring, dorky backwater. Now it's the innovation district. Now it's got all these, you know, tech firms and arts districts and museums, and all this is linked together. And you're attracting a different workforce. So that's the sort of backup notion, the economic value. There's also an environmental value to it, you're reducing carbon emission and all that. But the first point of all this is typically, you know, why did New York City build a subway system? It was congestion relief. It wasn't, wow, we need to do real estate development off the subway system. They figured that out later on, but it wasn't the manifest purpose. We're building for that purpose. Our manifest purpose of this, and that's why there is a commission. That's why Tina's on this commission. That's why they've just rolled out an enormous plan that's quite impressive, and I'm very supportive of, and I think everybody should be supportive of. The reason is simple. We actually just need this straight up. Then we get the benefits. We're a twofer. You know, Phoenix, did it need it? Yeah, some. Could it use it? Certainly. I think it's a vast improvement. I think Phoenix is a better city and getting better every day as a consequence of having not just world-class suburbs like Paradise Valley, but also having a place for somebody to live there if they choose to live in multifamily and not be reliant exclusively on private transportation. All that's great. All that's good. Vegas needs it because Orlando's doing it and we're not. Straight up. They're going to kill us. They're going to beat us because they're going to get people to conventions and they're going to take conventions away. They have 6 million square feet of space, by the way. Why? Because every large hotel there, which is replications of theme parks basically, but has big footprints. The Dolphin has 300,000. You know, all these hotels in and around Disney are like our resorts, and they're near their convention center, and you can program enormous conferences. Right now, the biggest thing they got is plastics. What do they want? They want the Consumer Electronics Show. So, and what do they go after? The rodeo. What are they going after? Our events. They're going after conventions, events, and what they're doing is they're building the infrastructure necessary for mobility, and they see it that way. So the biggest metros in the Mountain West, all of our competitors have these systems I mentioned previously, and they're all building more of it. And they all have their airports linked. And this is just a quick map to show this single disconnect, again, could be completed down here, but notice how close, preciously close it was to the airport. There's even a little plane. If I flew to this, if I went to this city, the first, and I had no knowledge of Las Vegas. I came from Beijing, all right, where they have everything multimodal integrated. And I flew this city, and they handed me this map. The first question I'd say is, but, why? Why this? You know, and you'd have to say, well, there was this taxi cab commission. And then there was this, and then this happened, and then that, and then this one said they didn't want it in their property. And that one said, and they don't do that stuff in other cities. What they do is they build it to the airport. They build it to the airport as fast as they can get it to the airport. And the reason they do is that airports are bottlenecks. And solving the congestion in a bottleneck and reducing friction of movement is the heart of economic development when it comes to people moving and tourism. And that's our main business. I mean, we could suffer with congestion if our business was inventing stuff. The leading export of the San Francisco Bay Area is royalties owed to the region for its invention. It's the largest foreign exchange for San Francisco. So in San Francisco, it's not a product. The largest foreign exchange for LA is intellectual property paid on bad TV, okay? The biggest one in San Francisco is for, you know, iPhones and for patents and all that. They can sit around in a congested region and it wouldn't really affect their economy. It might affect some of their exchange points in terms of, you know, creating these business environments. But for us, it's deadly. So another quick look at the Strip again. In that context, all of this disconnect has to be connected. Maryland Parkway over here has to be connected. The Strip has to be connected to North Las Vegas and Henderson. And we have 4 non-integrated systems. So other big picture just to end with this, and I'm going to take Q&A right after this. Economic development. So congestion's a problem, but if you look at Phoenix, where they estimated just about $1 billion along their light rail system, they actually have seen about $7 billion in estimates for construction. Again, that doesn't include the fact that stuff that used to be lower rent went higher rent and can pay more taxes and has a higher tax increment. And along that rail line, this is what you see. Cranes and dirt and signs of future stuff. And again, Phoenix developed this system, and it opened into the heart of the Great Recession. So they opened this system up, and the country has just gone through the worst economic downturn it has known since the Great Depression. Yet, Phoenix has one thing that keeps going. The investment around this system is almost unbroken because it's a new category of investment. It's not the next subdivision. It's not, let's get the BLM to give us some land so we can put some more houses on it. It's in their existing space, and it's remaking their existing space. So beyond the construction, you have this tech corridor. And the fact is that there are certain firms that seek locations that have multi-dimensional space, that have transit, that have walkability. And for example, First Solar got its own stop on the light rail. Why? Who works at First Solar? People that like solar. People that like solar want to save energy. People that want to save energy want these systems, and they want walkability, and they want this lifestyle. So we're, right now, we were one of the bidders, just to give you how tangible this is for us. We were one of the bidders for a branch of the patent office out of Washington, D.C. Turns out a lot of patents in the U.S. are west, with San Francisco being a lot of it. So the patent office, in its infinite wisdom, said, we got to get out of Washington. We're going to move an office west, and we can't go to San Francisco because it costs $1 million billion for 1 square inch of San Francisco. So here are these other cities. And we're in there, Denver's in there. And the people who work in the patent office work within steps of that VRE stop in Alexandria, Virginia, I showed you, in an enormous complex called the Carlisle. Mixed use, mixed tenure, owner housing, renter housing, retail space, restaurants, office, commercial, private, law firms that are patent law firms, in an enormous complex tied between 2 metro stops and a VRE stop, purposely. So when they asked the folks who are going to be sent packing to the Great West, because some of the staff, Washington doesn't want to start a whole new office out of new employees and have to answer questions during debates for that sort of action. They say, we're going to take some of the staff, and you're going to work out west. But we're going to get your input. We're not going to just move you. Where do you want to go? I want to go to this rail. Why? I use rail now. I don't want to go from rail to no rail. Who won? Denver. Where is it? Right near their main station. Right near where their Union Station integrates regional rail and light rail. And we were never in the game. And the point is, with this kind of workforce, we're never going to get in the game. These are, by the way, students going to a graduation. It's a publicity shot for ASU on the light rail. And there are students graduating out of these cohorts right now, in our cohorts, that just can't understand why a place wouldn't have this capacity. And they will go and seek out places that have this capacity. So with that, I'll do Q&A. And just raise your hand. We've got a mic for you. And I could do it for both talks. So thank you. Questions?
I would like to start us off with a question. And just before we do, I'll remind people that the PowerPoints will be up on our Brookings Mountain West website, as will the video. So if you want to make reference or have other people take a look, they'll be available soon. Sir?
Rob, I saw the figure $7 billion for
Yeah.
Phoenix's system.
Yeah.
How did they fund that?
They did a land survey along the length of the track and determined what was the projected amount of investment. And so it added up all the multifamily, it added up all the facilities, everything along the line. And it included remaking. Some structures were remade.
What was the source of the funds for the
Mostly private. So here's what happened, and remember too, I mean, part of what you pay for these systems is that you can say an increment of the improvement is now an increased tax, and it could be as much as a quarter of the system. So you did this in Washington, D.C. at the Tyson's Corner build out as well. So most investment around light rail is private. And one of the reasons that you're incented to invest around light rail is it's permanent. You know that if somebody's taking the trouble to put a rail line and station in, that station will be there for decades. There's great shots, by the way, in downtown Salt Lake City where they show like 1901, 2001, and it's the same intersection. And one is they're building it twice. They're building the same intersection with rail that they built because they tore it out in the mid-20th century. Barring that, I don't think we're going to tear this stuff out again. So what it does is a signal. It's a signal that says, invest here if you want to go dense. So per inch, it's higher intensity. And you could actually capture that through taxation, and you could take that as a calculation for paying it. So even because otherwise you're a free rider, you're a beneficiary. If you hold land near this, like if you hold land across the street from this school in Maryland Parkway, and you're a real estate holder, and you own that vast parking lot, that parking lot's more valuable. You know the dead shopping mall up the street, the semi-dead shopping mall, the one that's teetering on the edge, Boulevard? Boulevard's more valuable for the parking lot if you build a rail. That's what happens. Because the proximity to the rail means you have access to a system. And remember, the rail here goes somewhere. It goes to an airport to which you could fly nonstop throughout almost all the United States and a lot of the world. And it goes to all these other assets within the city that are fun. So it's not like, why would I? No one wants to go there. People do want to go there. So that's where it came from. They self-report.
So Rob, what do you see as some of the key things that either need to happen in the local community or the local community could do for itself to support and push these kind of things forward?
Well, you notice I didn't talk about paying for it. And, that's always like, how are you going to pay for it? And what we're going to do later in the spring is Rob Puentes from Brookings in DC will come out in March and speak to the idea of how people are getting this paid for. So, one of the things is creative finance. Now, the good news is in DC, they passed a new transportation bill, luckily, and they added money for this kind of investment. And you can pay for it partly by federal sources. We can pay for it out of tax increment finance. We can find ways of capturing some share of various forms of taxation that typically are related to tourism that they've done in, for example, Phoenix. The good news is for us, and I believe this is a truthful calculation, RTC estimates that the fare box itself in the heart of the Strip does 125% of operating. Let me tell you what a sweet spot that is. When a lot of these systems get developed, they have to find two sources of revenue. One, the capital costs, and two, how do you pay the subsidy because the operating never matches? We don't have to do the second. In fact, we're going to be so successful because so many people want to go from that airport to that Strip, because it's not abstract. I'm making this up, There's this giant airport and there's this giant Strip, and they want to go from that airport to that Strip, and we charge them. What you could do is then subsidize the costs for workers through the hotels and reduce some of the congestion from workforce by picking that up as well. We're in a virtuous position of allowing some share of the transit use by tourists to offset local costs for access for passengers that are using it for workaday stuff. And that would encourage the use of it then. And that means we have one challenge, the capital costs. And we have a government that luckily decided not to get out of this business. And we have a message from the head of the transportation department, the Secretary of Transportation, who himself was an influential figure in light rail because he was the mayor of Charlotte. He gets it. He's a mayor. Mayors are great when they're department heads. You don't have to explain to them what's happening in cities. They know. He is a font of wisdom on this. And he turned to us and said, I get moving on this pretty quickly. Because someday they may decide not to do this anymore. And then we're deeper in the hole. And so, the other sources, we have so many sources of tourist income. We have sources that even potentially we could use, and I'll say this and I'll regret saying it. Some of the money that's intended for the land sales, the exchange that we have with the BLM, is for the purpose of preservation of land. One of the greatest land preservers, and I didn't go into the environmental analysis here, is that if you build a high quality transit system through your core, you deflect some share of housing that would have gone to the periphery that would have been on that land. So we're asking the BLM for less land. We're cutting into Red Rocks Canyon Preserve less. We're less pressure on the McDowell Mountains, less pressure north. And we're building a more compact region, and we might be able to argue, and we only have to do this at the Southern Nevada Land Office, that as a proxy for the preservation, we could actually show in a model, here's what light rail will have in housing, here's how many occupants there'll be, here's the equivalent of that in peripheral growth in multifamily and single family detached, here's how much land would be consumed by it, therefore, that's how much land we think we preserved, please send the money over. If we have resources like that, then we have more resources to build the thing. Yes?
But the
Quick question now here.
But the
Take
law-
away.
But the law
What's your
for SNPLMA doesn't allow, the law for SNPLMA at this time, unless Congress changes the law, doesn't allow that type of.
The interpretation of the law, from what I understand, is actually at the BLM office in the South. And here's what you can do. It's called transfer of development rights. So New Jersey has a whole regime built in the New Jersey State Master Plan of 1992 that said that if you deflect development to, Newark, New Jersey, and you take it off the Appalachian Highlands, you can transfer these kinds of resources to it because it's land preserving. So in other words, the decision, I believe, and we could get into this and we could lawyer up on these kinds of things, but the decision is this. I think if everybody in this valley came together, if you had the mayor of North Las Vegas who thinks it's going to get built past his downtown, you have the mayor of Henderson who thinks it's going to go to their downtown, you have the mayor of Las Vegas cheerleading it, you have the county commission, and you all show up at this office and you say, here is a credible method to determine that the greatest preservation of nature and land in this region ever would be the construction of a system that secures and fortifies core development, and here is a mathematical calculation that is based on the experience of multiple states that have used transfer of development rights, which is not a sexy instrument in New Jersey or the East. And they have this estimate, this is how much housing we think we'll get, this is how much we deflect, and here is how much land we don't need. We believe this is more important as a space conserving effort than any park or preserve we have so far invested in. I mean, they could say no. But the steamroller of multiple jurisdictional cooperation, this is why we need to all be in on this. The simple fact is this. If we cooperate and we all throw in and we agree this is true, and we agree this is the right, and they've done this in every other region, that's the lesson, then I don't think there's any limit to what we can get done as far as the construction of this system or the speed in which it's built. And there is an imperative here, which is that everybody else has already made this decision that competes with us, and they're expanding these systems. So I don't think anybody would begrudge us creative finance. But short of something like that, let's say that's not even true. It's not like we don't have the resources in the rest of our tax regime to do it anyway. It's just an enhancement. All right, one more question, two more questions?
Rob, over here.
I'll go as long as you want. People are probably squirming in the seat looking to get out of here soon. Yeah, go
I'll
ahead.
be real quick. I think this is on.
Yep.
Quick question. And you tie into what you just, a key word you just mentioned was creativity. What other cities are doing, how we need to look at things a little differently. How does a couple of concepts tie into what you're talking about today in terms of the infrastructure investments that we're discussing here? Number one, congestion pricing as a way to manage demand, because incentives matter, obviously, and, God forbid, charging for parking at casino garages.
Yes. You could
How
do
does that
those
change?
forms of transfer, and congestion pricing, of course, is used in big cities in Europe, especially like London. And if you want to get to the center of London and you want to use private transportation, there is a cost for doing it. And that cost charge then transfers to other forms of transportation that subsidize non-car users, in other words. So but here's the problem. The entire business model of the Strip assumes this. It's easy to get here. It's easy to park. The owners of these resorts would prefer not to create any significant barrier to somebody's access to the resort. They see this as something facilitating it. What I'd say is this. We have one of not just the largest tourist industries, we have one of the largest taxes on tourist industry. There's a rating of tourist taxation around the country. There's a center that looks at all just tourist taxes at the University of Illinois, Chicago. And I know why it's there, because they're the most expensive. Chicago has the highest tourist taxes. Out of 50 big metros, want to guess who's the least expensive? Orlando. Oh, crap. Want to guess who's 17th? Us. We're already past the midpoint. Now, what I'd say is this. We just have to go to the state capitol and say, if you let us construct these forms of tourist infrastructure, the expansion in the tourist economy and the capture of the taxation over that expansion equals this investment or even exceeds it. So in other words, you could show Carson City, and they do this in Orlando. They go to Tallahassee and they say, indulge us, if you will. We believe that if you allow us to carve out and invest a share of our tourist taxation in tourist infrastructure, that the number of tourists coming will go up significantly to the extent that they will make up for the lost taxes. We'll send you more. The check on our taxes to Tallahassee will be bigger because we fix stuff. They think the check is going to be real big after they complete the maglev to the convention center. So we have that same opportunity with 3/4 of the state's population. We can go to Carson City and say, look, there's models around the country that show that if you build various forms of tourist infrastructure, that the amount of taxation generated by the increased trade in tourism will make up for the fact that you've allowed a bit of a carve out. Here's the good news for us. The amount of retail sales on the strips, all of the sort of generation of taxation, live entertainment. When we expanded live entertainment, we said to Carson City, how much more do you want from us in live entertainment? We'll send it. We didn't at that point then say, we're going to go and expand live entertainment. We're going to capture more of it. But in that capture, we're going to take our share out, and we're going to use it to invest in venues for live entertainment, for example, like a stadium. We didn't do that, and that was our fault for not doing that, because what we did in that is we then sent it all out of the region. We transferred the wealth out of the region without capturing it. Orlando is more careful with its portfolio, and in fact, it sees very little opportunity to raise taxes because it's a family values town, meaning, when they say heads in beds, they mean 3 heads in 1 bed, because they're all 12 and below. So they're really, the parents are already getting stuck with a doll that cost $8,000 at the park. You're not going to clip them at the airport for the rent-a-car like that. They got low rent-a-car fees, they got low taxes on beverage, because the city realizes it has limited elasticity. But what it does do is, when they wanted to go after our rodeo, they were going to build that out a live entertainment tax. They think, this is crazy, that I know this is nuts, that the taxes you're generating out of an industry might be invested in the infrastructure that expands that industry. We've never had that attitude. We hardly have any of that investment. So light rail is part of it. So we could say to the casinos, we don't want to mess with your business model. In fact, money that you're now sending to the state, if it were carved out sufficiently, would be enough resource, and we could then end up sending more taxes to the state capital because we think we're going to get that much more trade out of it. Are you on board? I don't think anybody's going to say no to that. You just have to convince legislators that's true. You have to convince them that proposition works, that they're not going to have a budget shortfall. And Orlando has a better habit and history and cohesion in doing that. And let's face it, Universal and Disney hate each other in LA. They tear at each other. They're in a global fight over content and media. In Central Florida, they love each other. They see themselves as a common agglomeration economy. You're going to hit both parks, and they're cooperative. If we need that kind of cooperation out of our sector, our core sector, and out of the leadership in the city. A couple more questions, maybe? One or two? Sure.
Yeah,
And over there. And you're next. Yeah.
I worked with companies that were trying to put the same sort of thing in. And the taxi cab drivers fought it tooth and nail. The Las Vegas Journal, in her wisdom, had knocked that too, which I presume you haven't talked to them. Who knows what the management's going to be saying over there. Maybe
If one guy likes it now, it'll be fine.
Yeah, that's the case. But the fact
From what I understand, he likes it.
I just remember the last time the RTC talked about light rail, the editorials that came out of the Journal opposing it,
Yeah.
saying go back to typical stretch buses. This will do the trick. And the fact is, I'm just worried that at first everybody thought the monorail running down the strip, connecting everything to the airport was the greatest thing since sliced bread. Within a matter of months, that whole thing turned around. So who do you anticipate is going to be the opposition to this? Are the cab drivers going to come out and say you're going to ruin our business?
Uber already got those guys.
Oh, well,
yeah. No, I'd say this. Let me give you my own arc. So January 2010, I moved here. And I started talking, fool I am, I started talking light rail. And some of the leadership in the city's like, oh, listen, if you go on stage, do us a favor. Don't mention light rail. Now, I think that I've seen a change. I don't think Tina's upset that I'm talking about light rail right now, because you're allowed to talk about light rail now. This is the difference. How many more cities have to get this? Maybe if Reno gets it, we'll get light rail. How many more cities? I'm going to support Reno light rail now.
They're working on it.
I know they are. And they brought Chris Nelson in, and I know the consultant guy was my colleague at Virginia Tech. Part of the problem is it's a limited universe of people that are expert in this, and I know plenty of them, so I know where there's anticipated expansion of these kinds of systems. And, and Nelson's also done some analysis for us on he's an expert out of the Washington Metro. We did all this work for VDOT in Virginia on the tax increment finance off of Tyson's Corner. I can see these systems emerging in smaller and smaller markets. The mayor of Boise was once on the rail with me in Salt Lake City with former Mayor Becker, and we went out to the airport on this little doohickey that tested track, and Boise's saying we need it. And when Boise, look, Tucson got it. Tucson has a streetcar. So, I don't know how many more of these we need to see. And here's the kicker. It would never work better than here. When it went in, everybody would claim they were the figure that, thank God I pushed this thing, because it's going to work so well. And I say that because it's mathematical to me. There's a part of it that's design, there's a part of it that's, funky people hanging out and having fun on the train and all that stuff that I just showed you. And then there's a part that's just straight up math. I believe the RTC's numbers are correct, that a fare box would be that generative. Because I know what it's like when you relieve congestion and you provide alternative in a corridor that has that kind of popularity. And we're growing more tourists. So what do we have to get to 50 million before we realize we can't go another inch? We are going, and this is the most important thing, the state's core economy is tourism. No matter what we do with Faraday or Tesla or technology, those are all supplemental, they're great, let's do them. I'm a big supporter of that. I'm a big supporter of expanding our healthcare, all that. But the bottom line is this. What got us to this dance? What took a state that was a Dakota or below, that was half the size of Wyoming in 1940, that was the smallest state in population until 1960, thank God Alaska entered the Union, and made it a 3 million, you were there, and then made it a Kansas size, a Mississippi size, a 2 million plus metro, a 30th ranked metro in the United States, tourism. And what's the vulnerability? Friction, movement, congestion. And what haven't we built? This stuff. And who's building it? Our chief competitors. Atlanta wants all this too. Chicago's saying they're going to revisit convention trade, and this has been so good for us. The events economy was more resilient to discretionary tourism in the downturn. People would say, hey, I don't think I can go to Vegas because I checked the bank account, there's nothing in it. But I'm going to that rodeo, and I'm going to that Consumer Electronics Show because it's in my business and I have to go. And we programmed in enough events to sustain this city through those darkest days. And we need to build on that. And if we don't build this infrastructure, it isn't going to happen. So I just would say that there's no greater city at risk for the lack of this capacity than ours. And we need to be forthright and say that. And I believe that in my heart, that's true. And there are cities that just got it as an enhancement. Could Salt Lake City still be Salt Lake City without it? Yeah. It wouldn't be as nice a city. It wouldn't be as open to sort of alternate housing and different kinds of industries and millennials and all that, but it would still be okay. Ours is facing a real crisis, All right, one more question up there, and then that's it. I see the time's running out.
It's kind of a twofer, but the first one is, would it be better to have this operated publicly rather than as a private system? I've heard discussion about doing it privately like we did with the Monorail, and it seems there were some real problems with that by allowing a company to make those decisions that seem to be in the best interest of the community. And the second would be, would it be a mistake not to do it all at once, to go to North Las Vegas, Henderson, and all the resort corridor and business corridor, or would it be better to build in that area and then try to go to Henderson and try to go to North Las Vegas later? But then back to question one, if you leave that to private enterprise, are they suddenly going to be very profitable? And they say, well, why would we want to go out to the suburbs when that's going to cut into our fare box revenue?
It should be public, and it should use funds generated through the public capture of taxation and tax increment and all that. And it should be staged. And the first thing you should do is just build the core of the system. So if it doesn't get to these places, this is what I'd say to the mayors of Henderson and North Las Vegas. We'll get to you. They got to Mesa. Mesa at first was happy just to take a park and ride like a half a mile into the city border. So when I was there in 2006 and I interviewed Keno Hawker, the mayor of Mesa that predated Scott Smith, the most recent mayor who's famous for expanding the metro, the Valley Metro out to Mesa. This guy wasn't hostile the way Berman was and Gilbert to the light rail, but he wasn't that enthused. He said, you know what, I get what a park and ride is, and I think it's good that our city, it doesn't need to be in downtown. I asked him that point blank. I interviewed this guy in the spring of 2004 and 5, and I lived there in 06, and I finished the book there in 06, and I was talking to these mayors, and they were kind of lukewarm. They were, I get it as a park and ride. I don't think we need our downtown laced with rail. To, several years after that, Scott Smith's entire overriding priority was to get that thing through downtown. And it's going to keep going. So it's going to keep going further east several more miles. So what I'd say is this. I don't think, if you cut a deal with the leadership in North Las Vegas and Henderson, and as rational as those folks are, and they are, and you could talk to somebody like Mayor Lee, who I've talked to about this most recently in North Las Vegas, and he'd like to see, if Apex took off, he'd like to see a sort of ride share with the freight line, but he gets that it would be good for downtown, it would be good for his city, but he also gets that the highest priority is the airport, the convention center, and the Strip. That's our bread and butter. If you get that going and it succeeds, I think you're going to be in an immediate turnaround to the expansion of this. And what's going to be interesting is, right now no one's talking about a Western line. No one's talking about Summerlin. No one's talking about, everything right now is the idea that there's a linear structure to the city, that the airport's south, the Strip's in the middle, the downtown's north, and there's terminuses in places like Henderson and North Las Vegas. And all of the sort of idea, the flow of Las Vegas is a north-south flow. But meanwhile, we've built these very deluxe and deep, mixed-use, multifamily, downtown, downtown Summerlin's not an inconsequential space. What my guess is that build the core, expand to the periphery of the planned periphery in these cities, and you immediately have folks in the West saying, we need a Western line, we need a Western line, we need a Western line. Because every time you see these in other cities, that's exactly what happens. Somebody's always saying, you need a new line. And sometimes they get it, and sometimes they don't. And in this city, I think there could be such success that we're talking about a maturity of this system to mid-21st century that might shock us today, that we become sort of a national model for having built it fast and built it comprehensively. And I'll end on this note, and this is the best news of all. We know where and how this works. And there have been successes and failures. There have been mistakes. There have been undercapacities, and there have been tremendous successes. And we have enough experience in constructing this stuff, and enough predicted experience, and here's even the best news. You say, what's the private investment around it? When the first stuff went as light rail in private investment, the real estate investment trusts, the external secondary conduits that channel the Niagara of capital that goes into most high-end real estate development, had no concept of what this was as an investment category. So look at the 90s, they built it. Early part of 2000, there's still a struggle to understand how to create standard, securitized instruments to invest in multifamily at light rails. There's no specialists in it. There's a few emerging, like the Olson Company in Seal Beach, California, loves light rail stops. They built at Fullerton, they built at Orange, and so on. But there's no Niagara of capital. This is what's different now. In the secondary market that finances most of real estate investment in America, there is enough of a track record for analysts to reasonably calculate the investment value of transit access, TOD development, to flow this capital to these projects. So there was a very slow start in some cities because every mom and pop shop was figuring out how to work an interchange, how to work TOD, how to work transit-oriented development. Then enough of it went up with small companies like the Olson Company in Seal Beach that I mentioned, who I worked for in the last part of the decade, looking at these places like Fullerton and Orange and so on. And now what it is that the main capital markets, Wall Street, know how to invest in this. So that means that when Las Vegas, which is a well-traveled city and a well-known city, puts its light rail up, the Niagara of capital to the investments around the stops flow because this whole apparatus now exists. That's the benefit of being late. It really hasn't affected us because what it hasn't done is so far, I don't think it's taken this city off a trajectory to where it would have expanded tourism, and it has successfully expanded tourism. I think if we don't build it now, we're at risk. But when we build it now, we build with the benefit of not just the experience of the actual construction and case analysis that we know how to do it better. It's that when we build it and we turn to investors and say, do you know what this is? They say, know what it is. We actually have a real estate investment tranche and a secondary conduit that's securitized around the idea of certain performance standards of this space. And we're going to get people in every 401k that invest 5% share in REITs into this mix, and you're going to see your space built out quickly. And we will see this built, and we see it built quickly. With that, I thank you.
A field trip. We have the
Oh, field trip in Denver.
Yeah, field trip
We
in
should,
Denver.
we should stop at the office for the patent office and ask them how happy they are with having moved there.
Just so everybody knows, we are organizing a field trip to visit Denver Union Station and hear from the leaders of their community, their investors who helped build Denver Union Station and the light rail that's going out to the airport. The dates are March 7th and 8th, and if you're interested, just let one of us know. It's a no host, you do have to pay for it.
What?
Yeah, I know. But we have some sponsored dinners and events.
Thanks, Tina. Let me thank you all once more for your attendance and your involvement with us. Come back and see us in March when our colleague Rob Puentes is out here. This is not the end, but only the beginning, and a lot more to do and say. So I'm sure we'll see all of you at many more meetings. Let's get
And the
this done.
video's up, right? We'll put the
And
video up.
Yes,
too.
we'll be sending out, you'll get emails about being able to watch yourselves and reference everything that was said today.
Thank you.